Chapter 1. The Weight of Attachment. There are things we hold long after they have stopped holding us. A person who no longer chooses us. A future that no longer seems possible. A version of ourselves that belonged to another season of life. A memory we return to because it still feels warmer than the present. A hope we cannot release because letting go would force us to admit that something has changed. Attachment often begins quietly. At first it feels like love, like loyalty, like ambition, like faith in what could still be. It can feel noble to remain devoted, to keep hoping, to keep trying, to refuse to give up. But there is a point at which holding on stops being an expression of care and becomes a way of avoiding reality. And when that happens, attachment becomes heavy. It begins shaping the mind. It influences choices. It changes how a person sees themselves, how they interpret silence, how they measure their worth, and how much peace they allow themselves to feel. The problem is not that we care. The problem is that we sometimes make what we care about responsible for our emotional survival. The things we hold too tightly when people think of attachment, they often think of another person. They think of a relationship that ended, someone emotionally unavailable, a friendship that changed, or a person whose attention still seems to determine the emotional weather of the day. But attachment is much broader than this. People become attached to outcomes. They attach themselves to the belief that life must unfold in a particular way. They decide that a certain job, relationship, achievement, home, image, or timeline is necessary before they can finally feel complete. They become attached to memories. They return to old moments because the past seems to contain something the present does not. They replay a time when they felt loved, admired, secure, young, hopeful, or understood. The memory becomes more than a memory. It becomes a place of emotional residence. People become attached to roles. The responsible one. The strong one. The needed one. The successful one. The person who never asks for help. The person who always holds everything together. These identities may have protected them once, but over time they can become cages. And people become attached to old versions of themselves. They miss the person they were before the loss, before the failure, before the change, before the disappointment. They may keep measuring their present self against a former identity, unable to accept that life has altered them. Attachment says, this must remain. It says, this cannot change. It says, I cannot be okay without this person, this outcome, this role, this memory, or this version of myself. But life does not always preserve what we love. People change. Plans collapse. Roles become too small. Relationships end. Dreams take unexpected forms. The self evolves in ways that may feel like loss before they feel like growth. The more tightly we hold, the more every change feels like a threat. When caring becomes clinging, caring is natural. To love someone, to work toward a goal, to remain loyal to a value, to hope for a better future, these are not weaknesses. They are part of what makes life meaningful. But care becomes clinging when the object of care begins to control your inner stability. You care when you can love someone and still remain yourself. You cling when their presence, approval, response, or mood determines whether you can feel whole. You care when you can pursue a goal with dedication. You cling when the result becomes the only proof that your life has value. You care when you remember the past with tenderness. You cling when you cannot allow the present to exist without comparing it to what has already gone. Clinging often hides beneath beautiful language. It says, I am just loyal. But perhaps loyalty has become fear of ending a chapter. It says, I am just trying harder. But perhaps effort has become refusal to accept what is not being returned. It says, I still have hope. But perhaps hope has become a way to delay grief. It says, I cannot give up. But perhaps giving up is not the real issue. Perhaps the deeper fear is facing who you would be without the thing you are holding. This is why attachment can be difficult to recognize. It often feels like devotion. It may even be praised by others. The person who never lets go can appear loving, committed, patient, and strong. But no relationship, goal, or memory should require the complete abandonment of the self. The moment you begin sacrificing your peace, dignity, boundaries, or reality in order to keep something close, care has begun to turn into dependence. And dependence always comes with fear. Fear beneath attachment. At the center of attachment is often fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of emptiness. Fear of being replaced. Fear of uncertainty. Fear of discovering that you are not enough without a certain person, role, or outcome. Attachment says, if this leaves, something in me will collapse. This is why release can feel so impossible. The person is not only losing an external thing, they fear losing the emotional meaning attached to it. A relationship may represent safety. A career may represent worth. A role may represent identity. A memory may represent a time when life felt possible. An outcome may represent the promise that all the struggle will finally make sense. So when life asks us to let go, it can feel as though it is asking us to step into an empty room without knowing what will be there. The attached mind would rather hold on to familiar pain than face unfamiliar freedom. This is not because people are weak. It is because the familiar carries emotional safety, even when it hurts. A person may remain attached to someone who repeatedly disappoints them, because disappointment is still easier than absence. They may stay attached to a dream that no longer fits, because changing direction feels like failure. They may continue performing an old identity because they do not know who they would become without it. Attachment turns uncertainty into something frightening because it asks the self to trust what has not yet been built. It asks, can you still be whole without this? For many people, that question is more frightening than staying in emotional captivity. But the truth is not that you become whole only after you let go. You begin letting go when you remember that wholeness was never meant to depend entirely on what can leave. The cost of holding on has a cost. It drains attention. You begin spending emotional energy monitoring what you fear losing. You reread messages. You replay conversations. You wait for signs. You compare the present to the past. You imagine the outcome you want and feel devastated whenever reality moves in another direction. It distorts judgment. You stop seeing a person as they are and begin seeing them as the answer to a need. You overlook what hurts because you are more afraid of losing them than of losing yourself. You turn small moments of attention into proof of hope and moments of distance into proof of disaster. It keeps you emotionally unavailable to the present. Part of you remains in the past, in the imagined future, or in a relationship that no longer exists in the form you need it to. You may be physically present with your life while emotionally waiting somewhere else. And perhaps most painfully, attachment can make you negotiate against your own dignity. You accept less than you need because you fear having nothing. You remain silent because you fear conflict. You overgive because you fear being forgotten. You keep chasing closure because you fear that without it, you cannot move on. But peace does not come from forcing people, memories, or outcomes to stay close. It comes from becoming able to remain close to yourself when they do not. Detachment does not mean that nothing matters. It does not mean becoming distant, cold, or indifferent. It means learning that love does not require possession, hope does not require denial, and commitment does not require self-abandonment. It means allowing life to change without allowing every change to destroy your center. The weight of attachment begins to lift when you stop asking, how do I keep this? And begin asking, what is this costing me to hold? Because most attachment begins with a fundamental human desire, the need to feel chosen, valued, and secure in the eyes of others. And until that need is understood, we may keep reaching for people and outcomes not because they are truly right for us, but because we hope they will finally prove that we are enough. Chapter 3. Why letting go feels like loss. Runtime 7 minutes. Purpose. Help the listener understand why detachment can feel painful even when it is necessary. Under 1. The grief of what could have been. 1.5 min. Mourning, imagined futures, lost possibilities, and the version of life that never arrived. 2. Hope as a form of attachment. 2 min. When hope is no longer healing but keeps a person tied to unavailable people or impossible outcomes. 3. The mind's resistance to finality. 2 min. Denial, bargaining, replaying the past and searching for a different ending. 4. Letting go as an act of truth. 1.5 min. Releasing what no longer exists without denying that it mattered. Chapter Transition. Letting go is difficult, not only because of people, but because many people are attached to how life is supposed to turn out. Chapter 3. Why letting go feels like loss. Letting go is often described as though it were a simple decision. As though one day, after enough disappointment, a person simply wakes up and chooses to release what has been hurting them. They stop hoping. They stop checking. They stop revisiting the past. They stop imagining the message, the apology, the return, the different ending. But the heart does not always obey a decision as quickly as the mind makes one. Because letting go is not only about losing a person. It can mean losing a future you built around them. It can mean losing the hope that one day they would understand, that they would change, that they would return, that the effort you gave would finally be recognized, that the pain would lead somewhere meaningful. Sometimes what hurts most is not what happened. It is what never happened. The life you imagined. The conversation you never had. The version of love that existed more clearly in your hope than it ever did in reality. This is why detachment can feel like grief. You are not simply releasing what was. You are mourning what might have been. The grief of what could have been. There are losses that are easy to name. A relationship ends. A job disappears. A person leaves. A door closes. But there are other losses that remain invisible because they were never fully real in the outside world. They existed as possibility, as expectation, as a future the mind quietly began to inhabit. You may grieve the relationship you thought would deepen with time. You may grieve the person you believed someone could become. You may grieve the version of yourself you imagined you would be beside them. You may grieve a future home, a shared life, a repaired connection, an achievement, an identity, or a dream that never had the chance to arrive. This kind of grief is difficult because there is often nothing concrete to hold. No official ending. No clear ceremony. No visible proof that something important has been lost. And yet, the loss can be profound. The mind may say, "But it was never truly mine." The heart replies, "But I had already made room for it." That is the pain of what could have been. You are not only releasing a person or outcome, you are releasing the emotional space you created for it inside your life. This is why people can remain attached to situations that never fully became what they wanted. The lack of completion can make the attachment stronger. When something ends clearly, grief has a direction. But when something remains uncertain, the mind can keep returning to possibility. It says, "Maybe it was not over. Maybe I gave up too soon. Maybe one more conversation would have changed everything. Maybe the future I imagined is still waiting somewhere." But possibility can become a place of emotional captivity. It keeps the person loyal to a future that has not chosen to become real. Grief begins when we accept that not every imagined future is meant to arrive. And acceptance can hurt because it asks us to release not only a dream, but the version of ourselves who still believed the dream would save us. Hope as a form of attachment. Hope is beautiful when it helps a person endure difficulty. It can give strength during uncertainty. It can keep someone moving through loss, illness, failure, or a season that has not yet revealed its meaning. Hope can remind us that the present is not always permanent. But hope can also become attachment. It becomes attachment when it keeps you tied to someone who has repeatedly shown you that they cannot meet you. It becomes attachment when it asks you to wait indefinitely for a change that exists only in your imagination. It becomes attachment when you use hope to avoid the grief of seeing reality clearly. The person may say, "I know they can be different," but perhaps they have only been different in brief moments. They may say, "They just need more time." But time does not always change what willingness has refused to change. They may say, "I cannot give up yet," but sometimes what they cannot release is not the person. It is the need for the story to end differently. Hope becomes painful when it is no longer connected to evidence, when it is no longer supported by action, consistency, honesty, or mutual effort. It can become a private promise that only one person is carrying. This kind of hope asks you to remain emotionally available to what remains unavailable to you. It tells you to keep waiting for clarity from someone who continues creating confusion. It tells you to keep investing in an outcome that has offered no real sign of meeting you halfway. It tells you that if you leave now, you may miss the moment everything finally changes. But a hope that requires you to abandon your dignity is not hope. It is fear of loss wearing the language of faith. Letting go of this kind of hope can feel cruel at first. It may feel as though you are becoming cynical, cold, or disloyal. But there is a difference between giving up on life and giving up on a fantasy that has kept you from living it. Healthy hope opens the future. Unhealthy hope keeps you waiting outside it. The question is not whether you should hope. The question is whether your hope is helping you move forward, or asking you to remain loyal to pain. The mind's resistance to finality. The mind resists endings because endings demand acceptance. They force us to confront what cannot be repaired, controlled, explained, or changed by one more thought. They ask us to stop negotiating with reality, and the mind does not surrender easily. It bargains. Maybe if I explain myself better. Maybe if I wait a little longer. Maybe if I become easier to love. Maybe if I say the right thing, they will finally understand. It replays the past. It studies old messages. It searches for hidden meanings. It returns to the moment where something changed and asks whether it could have been prevented. This is not always because the person wants the past exactly as it was. Often they want relief from the helplessness of knowing that the past cannot be altered. Replaying becomes an attempt to regain control. If you can find the exact mistake, perhaps you can imagine correcting it. If you can identify the exact moment things went wrong, perhaps the ending will feel less random. If you can understand why someone hurt you, perhaps the pain will become easier to carry. But some endings do not offer a satisfying explanation. Some people leave without giving closure. Some relationships fail despite genuine feeling. Some dreams end not because you were unworthy, but because life did not unfold in the direction you expected. The mind struggles with this because uncertainty is painful. It would often rather hold on to a painful story than accept an unanswered question. But finality does not always mean that the experience was meaningless. It means that its meaning must now be carried differently. You cannot keep living inside the chapter simply because you have not received the ending you wanted. Letting go as an act of truth. Letting go is not saying that it did not matter. It is not pretending that you were never hurt, never attached, never hopeful, never changed by what happened. It is not forcing yourself to become indifferent before you are ready. Letting go is telling the truth. It is saying this mattered to me. I wanted more from it. I hoped it would become something different. It hurt when it did not. And then with honesty saying, but I cannot keep asking reality to become what it has not chosen to be. This is the quiet courage of detachment. Not denying love, but releasing possession. Not denying hope, but refusing to let hope become self-abandonment. Not denying grief, but allowing grief to move rather than turning it into a permanent home. You can honor what was real without continuing to wait for what is no longer available. You can miss someone without making their absence the center of your identity. You can carry the lesson without carrying the entire weight of the story. Letting go does not erase the past. It gives the past a proper place. It allows you to say this was part of my life, but it does not have to decide the rest of it. That is why detachment is not a punishment. It is an act of truth, self-respect, and emotional release. Because letting go is difficult not only because of people. It is difficult because many people are attached to how life is supposed to turn out. And when reality refuses to follow the plan, the next kind of attachment begins, the attachment to outcomes. Chapter 4. Attachment to outcomes. There is a particular kind of suffering that begins long before anything goes wrong. It begins when the mind decides that life must unfold in a certain way. By a certain age, you should have achieved something. A relationship should become permanent. A career should provide meaning. A decision should lead to security. Hard work should be rewarded. Love should be returned. The future should resemble the one you quietly planned in your mind. At first, these expectations may feel harmless. They give direction. They create motivation. They help you imagine what you are working toward. But expectations can slowly become demands. And when inner peace depends on life obeying those demands, every detour begins to feel like failure. This is attachment to outcomes, the belief that you cannot fully rest, feel worthy, or be at peace until a particular future arrives. The life you tried to plan. Most people carry an invisible blueprint for how life is supposed to unfold. It may not be written down. It may not even be fully conscious. But it exists in the background of the mind. You may imagine a certain career by a certain age. A specific kind of relationship. A version of success that proves your effort mattered. Financial stability. Recognition. A home. A family. A body. A life that looks coherent from the outside and feels secure from within. There is nothing wrong with having hopes. The problem begins when hope becomes a rigid timeline. The person begins saying, "I should be further ahead by now." They compare their life to the imagined schedule. They see someone else succeeding and feel that they have fallen behind. They experience a delay and interpret it as proof that they are failing. They face an unexpected change and feel not only disappointed but personally betrayed by life. This happens because the mind often treats plans as promises. But a plan is not a promise. It is an intention made with limited knowledge. It is a direction, not a guarantee. It cannot account for every loss, delay, opportunity, change of heart, or unseen circumstance that may alter the path. Still, the attachment remains powerful. A person may hold on to a career long after it has stopped fitting them, because leaving would mean admitting that the original plan has changed. They may stay in a relationship because they are attached not only to the person, but to the future they imagine together. They may chase a version of success that no longer brings life to them simply because they once decided it was the proof that they had made something of themselves. The life you tried to plan can become more emotionally powerful than the life that is actually asking to be lived. And when that happens, reality begins to feel like an enemy instead of a teacher. Expectation as hidden control. Expectation often looks innocent. It says, "I am just hoping for the best." But beneath some expectations is a deeper need, the need to control what cannot be controlled. If you work hard enough, perhaps the result will be guaranteed. If you love well enough, perhaps the person will stay. If you make the right choice, perhaps regret will be impossible. If you prepare enough, perhaps life will never surprise you. This is the hidden promise of expectation. It tells you that effort can purchase certainty. But effort can influence outcomes. It cannot own them. You can prepare and still face uncertainty. You can love deeply and still not be chosen. You can act with integrity and still be misunderstood. You can make wise decisions and still encounter loss. This is not because effort is meaningless. It is because life is larger than individual control. Many people suffer because they confuse commitment with control. They believe that if they give enough, plan enough, improve enough, or wait long enough, life must eventually return exactly what they hoped for. And when it does not, disappointment becomes personal. They do not simply say, "This did not work out." They say, "I failed." Or worse, "Life has failed me." But disappointment is not always proof that you chose badly. Sometimes it is simply the pain of discovering that reality has its own direction. Expectation becomes suffering when peace is delayed until the outcome arrives. I will be happy when I get there. I will feel enough when they choose me. I will relax when I know this will work. I will accept myself when my life finally looks the way it should. But if inner peace depends entirely on a future result, then the present becomes a waiting room. You stop living where you are because you are emotionally living somewhere else. The pain of unmet expectations. When expectations are not met, the pain can take many forms. Sometimes it becomes grief. You mourn the future you believed was coming. You mourn the life you thought you would have by now. You mourn the relationship, achievement, or identity that seemed close enough to touch. Sometimes it becomes resentment. You look at life and feel that it has been unfair. You look at others and wonder why things came more easily for them. You feel angry at the person who did not become who you needed them to be, at the opportunity that did not arrive, or at yourself for believing too strongly. Sometimes it becomes self-blame. You search for the exact mistake. You ask whether you should have worked harder, spoken sooner, waited longer, been more patient, more talented, more attractive, more confident, more prepared. The mind wants a reason because a reason creates the illusion of control. If it was your fault, perhaps you can prevent the pain from happening again. But not every disappointment has a clean explanation. Not every closed door was closed because you lacked worth. Not every relationship ended because you failed to love correctly. Not every delay means you have fallen behind. Sometimes life changes the path because the path was never fully yours to control. This is difficult to accept because unmet expectations can feel like evidence that you are losing the life you were supposed to have. But there is a difference between a life not going according to plan and a life having no meaning. A detour can reveal a need you had ignored. A loss can expose an identity built on something unstable. A failed expectation can free you from a future that looked impressive but would have left you empty. This does not mean every disappointment is secretly good. Some losses are simply painful. Some endings leave real absence. Some dreams deserve to be grieved. But grief becomes lighter when you stop treating the unmet outcome as proof that your life has become lesser. Effort without emotional captivity detachment does not mean giving up on ambition. It does not mean becoming passive, careless, or unwilling to love deeply. It does not mean refusing to set goals because goals can disappoint you. It means learning to give your effort without giving away your entire identity. You can work hard without making achievement the proof that you deserve respect. You can love sincerely without demanding that love guarantee a particular ending. You can pursue a dream without believing that your life will be meaningless if the dream changes shape. You can prepare carefully without requiring certainty before you allow yourself to breathe. This is effort without emotional captivity. It asks you to focus on what belongs to you. Your honesty, your discipline, your choices, your boundaries, your attention, your willingness to learn. These are yours to shape. The outcome is not fully yours. Other people have their own freedom. Timing has its own logic. Circumstances change. Life contains forces no amount of planning can fully predict. The detached person does not stop caring about results. They simply stop using results as the sole measure of their worth. They can say, I will give this my best, but I will not destroy myself if it unfolds differently. They can say, I can want this deeply without making it responsible for my peace. They can say, I can grieve what I did not receive, and still remain open to the life that is here. This is not resignation. It is strength. Because the person who can act without emotional captivity becomes more resilient. They are less easily broken by delay, rejection, or change. They do not collapse whenever life refuses to follow the script. They adapt. They learn. They choose again. And when outcomes cannot be controlled, the fear beneath attachment becomes clearer. It is not only the fear that plans will fail. It is the fear of what remains when the plan, the person, or the promise is no longer there. The fear of facing life alone. Chapter 5. The fear of being alone. There are moments when silence feels peaceful. And there are moments when silence feels unbearable. The room is quiet. The phone has stopped buzzing. There is nowhere to go, no one to answer, no task urgent enough to distract you. And suddenly, the absence of noise becomes filled with something else. Thoughts return. Memories return. Questions return. You begin to feel the space left by the people, plans, roles, and distractions that once kept you occupied. You may not even miss a specific person at first. You may simply feel the discomfort of being left alone with yourself. This is why solitude can be so confusing. For one person, it becomes rest. For another, it becomes evidence of rejection. For one, it is freedom. For another, it is a room where old fears become louder. The difference is not always whether someone is physically alone. It is whether they have learned to feel emotionally safe in their own presence. Why silence can feel so loud. Silence removes distraction. And when distraction disappears, the feelings that have been waiting underneath it often rise to the surface. A person may move through the day surrounded by activity. Work, messages, responsibilities, conversations, entertainment, noise. They may appear busy, social, capable, and emotionally fine. But when the day slows down, something changes. The mind begins revisiting what was avoided. The sadness that had no space to speak. The disappointment that was never fully acknowledged. The fear that no one will truly stay. The longing for a life that feels more alive, more connected, more meaningful. Silence can feel loud because it does not create these feelings. It reveals them. The person may reach for their phone not because they need information, but because they need distance from themselves. They may turn on a video, send a message, scroll through old photographs, or look for someone to talk to. Not because connection is wrong, but because stillness has begun to feel too honest. In silence there is no audience to perform for, no immediate reassurance, no distraction strong enough to fully cover the inner question, what do I feel when there is nothing left to chase? This question can be uncomfortable, because many people have learned to measure their value through movement, through being useful, desired, included, needed, busy, diet. When all of that falls away, they may feel empty. But emptiness is not always proof that something is missing. Sometimes it is the first space in which something real can finally be heard. Stillness can reveal grief, but it can also reveal desire. It can reveal the needs you have ignored, the exhaustion you have normalized, and the parts of yourself that have been waiting beneath the noise of everyone else's expectations. Challenge is not to force silence to feel peaceful immediately. Challenge is to remain long enough to understand what the silence is trying to show you. The difference between alone and abandoned, being alone and being abandoned, are not the same thing. But for many people, they can feel almost identical. Physical solitude may awaken emotional memories of exclusion, rejection, neglect, or being left behind. The person is alone in the present, but their nervous system responds as though they are once again unwanted in the past. This is why a quiet evening can feel heavier than it seems. It is not only about the current absence of company. It may touch an older belief: if no one is here, perhaps I do not matter. If they are not reaching for me, perhaps I am forgettable. If I am alone, perhaps I have been left. These beliefs can become so automatic that a person begins seeking contact not from genuine desire, but from fear. They may stay in relationships that no longer nourish them. They may accept inconsistent attention as proof that they are still wanted. They may keep people close who make them feel lonely simply because the alternative of literal solitude seems even more frightening. But being surrounded by people is not the same as being connected. And being alone is not proof that you are unloved. Solitude may be chosen, temporary, healing, or necessary. It can be a space in which you recover your own voice. It can be the place where you stop adjusting yourself to the emotional demands of others long enough to discover what you actually feel. Abandonment is different. It is the wound of being made to feel that your needs, presence, or humanity did not matter. The work of detachment often requires separating these two experiences. To be alone is a condition. To feel abandoned is an emotional interpretation. The first may be true in a particular moment. The second may be an old wound speaking through that moment. This distinction does not erase loneliness. It does not make loss easy, but it gives you a new possibility. You can be alone without agreeing with the old story that says aloneness means you are unworthy of love. You can miss someone without making their absence proof of your own lack. You can want connection without believing that any connection is better than none. Escaping yourself through other people. Some people do not fear loneliness because they lack company. They fear it because company has become their escape. They move quickly from one conversation to another, one relationship to another, one source of attention to another. They keep the phone nearby. They make themselves available. They search for signs of interest. They fill every empty moment with another person's voice, opinion, need, or presence. From the outside, this can look like sociability. But internally, it may be avoidance. The person may not know who they are without being needed. They may not know how to rest without feeling guilty. They may not know how to sit with sadness without finding someone to soothe it. They may not know how to feel secure without someone else offering proof that they matter. Relationships then become emotional regulation tools. A message becomes relief. Attention becomes reassurance. Affection becomes protection from self-doubt. But when another person becomes responsible for regulating your inner world, attachment grows heavier. Their absence feels intolerable because it exposes what the relationship was helping you avoid. This is not an argument against closeness. Human beings need one another. We are shaped by connection, care, friendship, love, and shared experience. There is no strength in pretending that you should need no one. But connection becomes unhealthy when it is used to avoid your own inner life. You may ask someone to make you feel whole, when what you truly need is to stop abandoning the parts of yourself that feel incomplete. You may seek constant contact because you are afraid of hearing your own grief. You may stay attached to an unavailable person because the longing itself feels more familiar than the quiet that would follow release. Escaping yourself through others never brings lasting peace. It only delays the meeting. And eventually, life creates a pause. A relationship changes. A person leaves. A message goes unanswered. The room becomes quiet. Then the question returns: can I remain with myself here? Learning to become your own home, becoming your own home, does not mean becoming isolated. It means becoming a place of emotional safety for yourself. It means learning that when life becomes uncertain, you do not have to immediately abandon your needs, values, or dignity in order to be kept by someone else. You can offer yourself presence. You can notice your sadness without making it shameful. You can acknowledge loneliness without turning it into desperation. You can build a life that contains meaning even when no one is watching. This begins in small ways. A quiet walk without needing to fill every second. A meal eaten without distraction. A promise you keep to yourself. A creative effort that no one else needs to approve of. a boundary that protects your peace, a moment in which you choose not to chase reassurance and instead let yourself feel the uncertainty without collapsing into it. These actions may seem ordinary, but they build a new kind of trust. They teach the self, I will not leave you simply because someone else is absent. This is the foundation of emotional independence. Not the belief that you will never feel lonely, not the belief that you no longer need love, but the belief that loneliness will not force you to accept what harms you, that silence will not make you betray yourself, that another person's distance will not erase your value. When you become your own home, relationships begin to change. You no longer seek someone to rescue you from emptiness. You seek someone with whom you can share a life that already has an inner center. You no longer cling to every person who offers attention. You become more able to recognize who brings peace, who brings confusion, and who asks you to shrink in order to stay. You no longer confuse being needed with being loved. And slowly, solitude becomes less like a punishment and more like a place of return. The fear of being alone often explains why certain people remain psychologically present long after they have left. We may not be attached only to who they were. We may be attached to what their presence protected us from having to face. Chapter 6. The people we cannot release. Some people leave our lives, but do not leave our minds. They remain in the quiet moments, in certain songs, in places you pass without stopping, in phrases they used to say, in the sudden urge to check whether they are still there, still thinking of you, still living a life that somehow includes the possibility of your return. Sometimes it has been months, sometimes years. You may know the relationship is over. You may understand intellectually that they could not give you what you needed. You may even remember the pain clearly. And still, some part of you remains attached. This can be confusing. You ask yourself why you cannot move on from someone who disappointed you, why their absence still carries weight, why you keep returning to an ending you know cannot be changed. But attachment is not always a sign that the person was right for you. Sometimes it is a sign that the story remains unfinished inside you. Why some people stay in the mind, some people stay in the mind because they entered it during an emotionally intense time. Perhaps they appeared when you felt lonely, uncertain, unseen, or in need of hope. Perhaps they made you feel understood in a way you had not felt for a long time. Perhaps they arrived during a season when you were becoming someone new, and their presence became attached to that transformation. The emotional intensity of a connection can make it difficult to release, even when the connection itself was unstable. The mind remembers what felt powerful. It remembers the first conversation, the promise, the attention, the possibility. It remembers the moments when you felt chosen, desired, safe, or alive. And when the relationship ends, the mind may return not only to what happened, but to what those moments seemed to promise. This is why inconsistency can create such strong attachment. When affection appears and disappears, the mind keeps waiting for its return. A person may offer warmth one day and distance the next. They may create closeness, then withdraw. They may give just enough hope to keep the emotional door open. The attached mind becomes focused on the unanswered question. What did they really feel? Did any of it matter? Would things have changed if I had said something differently? Could it still become what I thought it would be? An ending without clarity can be especially difficult because the mind keeps trying to complete it. It replays conversations. It searches for signs. It imagines one final explanation that would make everything understandable. But not every story ends with the answer we want. Some endings remain incomplete because the other person was unable, unwilling, or emotionally unavailable to offer the truth we needed. And the mind struggles with that. It would rather keep asking questions than accept that some questions will remain unanswered. The person versus the fantasy. One of the hardest parts of letting go is recognizing that we are not always attached to the person themselves. Sometimes we are attached to what they represented. They may have represented safety, validation, hope, a new beginning, the feeling of being wanted, the belief that you were finally becoming the version of yourself you had hoped to be. This does not mean the connection was false. The feelings may have been real. The moments may have mattered. But the emotional meaning placed on the person can become much larger than who they actually were. You may miss the future you imagined with them more than the reality you lived with them. You may miss the way you felt at the beginning more than the way they consistently treated you. You may miss being chosen more than you miss the person who chose you. This is where idealization begins. The mind selects the moments of warmth and turns them into evidence that the relationship was meant to be. It softens the inconsistency. It minimizes the confusion. It forgets the ways you had to shrink, wait, overthink, or abandon your own needs to remain connected. Fantasy is often easier to love than the truth. The fantasy does not disappoint you again. The fantasy does not fail to reply. Fantasy does not reveal its limits. It remains perfect because it lives in the mind, protected from reality. But healing asks a difficult question: do I miss this person, or do I miss what I hoped they would give me? The answer may be painful. Because if you are attached to what they symbolized, then letting go requires more than releasing a relationship. It requires building within yourself what you kept searching for through them. If they represented validation, you must learn to value yourself without waiting for their approval. If they represented safety, you must build emotional safety in your own life. If they represented hope, you must allow yourself to imagine a future that no longer depends on their return. This is not a small task, but it is the beginning of release. Searching for closure in the wrong place, many people remain attached because they are waiting for closure. They want the apology, the explanation, the admission, the final conversation in which the other person finally understands the pain they caused and gives the relationship a meaning that feels complete. This desire is understandable. When someone hurts us, especially without clarity, we want them to help repair what they broke. We want them to name what happened. We want proof that our pain was real, that we were not imagining things, that we mattered enough to deserve honesty. But closure often cannot come from the person who caused the wound. They may not have the emotional maturity to explain themselves. They may not understand their own behavior. They may avoid responsibility. They may rewrite the story to protect their image. Or they may simply be unable to give you the care you needed then and still need now. Waiting for them to provide closure can keep your healing dependent on their capacity. And that means they continue holding power over your peace, even in their absence. Closure is not always a conversation. Sometimes, closure is the moment you stop asking a person to become someone they have repeatedly shown they cannot be. It is the moment you accept that their silence is also information. Their inconsistency is information. Their inability to meet you is information. Their refusal to explain may hurt, but it does not prevent you from seeing what the relationship was. You do not need every answer to know how something made you feel. You do not need their agreement to honor your own experience. You do not need an apology before you are allowed to stop carrying the pain. The closure you seek may begin when you stop asking, "Why did they do this to me?" and begin asking, "What do I now know that I must no longer ignore?" Releasing the story you kept rewriting, the mind often returns to the past because it is still negotiating with it. It keeps rewriting the story. Maybe you could have been more patient. Maybe you should have spoken sooner. Maybe you asked for too much. Maybe you left too quickly. Maybe they would have changed if you had given them one more chance. This internal negotiation can continue long after the relationship has ended. It becomes a way of avoiding the final truth that something important did not become what you needed it to be. But there is a point when replaying stops being reflection. It becomes self-punishment. You cannot change the past by finding a better version of yourself to place inside it. You cannot make another person capable of love by discovering the perfect words you failed to say. You cannot force an ending to become beautiful simply because you continue imagining it differently. Releasing the story means accepting what happened without making it the final definition of your worth. It means saying, "I may not understand every part of this, but I no longer need to keep reopening the wound in order to prove that it mattered." The past does not need your constant attention to remain real. You can let it be real. You can let it be painful. And you can still stop living inside it. Keeping the lesson, releasing the person, letting go, does not require you to erase someone from your memory. It does not require resentment. It does not require pretending that the relationship meant nothing, or that you were never changed by it. Some people teach us what we need. Others teach us what we can no longer accept. Some reveal our capacity to love. Others reveal where we abandon ourselves in the hope of being loved. The lesson may be painful, but it can still become part of your growth. You can keep the wisdom without keeping the attachment. You can remember the good without using it as a reason to deny the whole truth. You can forgive if forgiveness becomes possible without reopening the door to what harmed you. You can miss someone without making their absence a reason to stop living. This is the deeper meaning of release. Not forgetting. Not becoming cold. Not denying what mattered. but refusing to let an unfinished story become the place where your life remains emotionally trapped. The person may remain part of your past, but they do not have to remain the center of your inner world. And releasing another person often requires a skill that many people were never taught, creating boundaries without drowning in guilt. Chapter 7. Boundaries without guilt. For many people, saying no does not feel like a simple act. It feels dangerous. A request arrives. Someone needs something. A friend is disappointed. A family member expects more. A partner wants access to your time, energy, attention, or emotional space. And even when something inside you says no, another voice appears immediately. What if they are hurt? What if they think I am selfish? What if they leave? What if I disappoint them? So you say yes. You agree when you are exhausted. You answer when you need rest. You explain when a simple answer would be enough. You remain available when your inner world is asking for space. And afterward, you may feel resentment, drained, invisible, angry at the other person for taking too much, and angry at yourself for giving what you did not truly want to give. This is the difficulty of boundaries. They are often understood as rules for other people. But a boundary is first a promise to yourself. It is the decision that your needs, limits, time, and emotional well-being are not things you must sacrifice in order to remain lovable. Why saying no feels dangerous for some people? Saying no is not merely uncomfortable. It awakens an old fear. Perhaps they learned that love depended on being helpful, that peace depended on being agreeable, that conflict was dangerous, that other people's emotions were their responsibility to manage. They may have become the person who understood everyone, forgave quickly, avoided tension, and asked for very little. They learned to sense what others needed before anyone had to ask. They became useful, accommodating, patient, and easy to depend on. From the outside, this can look like kindness. But inside, it may be driven by fear. The fear that if they disappoint someone, they will be rejected. The fear that if they express a need, they will become a burden. The fear that if they create conflict, love will be withdrawn. People-pleasing is often not a desire to manipulate or impress. It is an old strategy for emotional safety. It says, if everyone around me is happy, perhaps I will be safe too. But this strategy comes at a cost. When you constantly organize your life around preventing other people's disappointment, you slowly lose contact with your own limits. You become so focused on what others need that you stop asking what is true for you. Then resentment begins to grow. Not always loudly. Sometimes it appears as exhaustion, irritability, withdrawal, delayed replies, or the feeling that everyone takes from you without ever truly knowing you. But the real problem is not always that people ask too much. Sometimes it is that you have never allowed yourself to answer honestly. Saying no feels dangerous because it risks changing the relationship. It may reveal who respects your limits and who only valued your availability. It may bring discomfort, confusion, or disappointment. But a connection that survives only when you abandon yourself is not a secure connection. It is an arrangement built on your silence. The difference between a boundary and a wall. A boundary is not a wall. A wall says, no one can come close to me. A boundary says, you may come close, but not at the cost of my well-being. A wall is built from fear. It keeps people out because closeness feels too dangerous. It may appear as emotional distance, silence, coldness, avoidance, or the refusal to express any need at all. A boundary is built from clarity. It allows connection, but it gives that connection a healthy shape. This difference matters. Many people avoid boundaries because they fear becoming cold, selfish, harsh, or difficult. They think that protecting themselves means rejecting others. They believe that, if they say no, they are closing the door on love. But boundaries do not destroy healthy intimacy. They make it possible. Without boundaries, relationships become filled with unspoken resentment. One person gives more than they can sustain. The other may not even realize what is happening. Needs remain hidden until they emerge as anger, distance, or emotional collapse. A boundary interrupts that pattern before it becomes destructive. It says, I care about you, but I cannot do this right now. It says, I'm willing to talk, but not if we are insulting each other. It says, I need time to think before I answer. It says, I cannot keep giving from a place of depletion. These are not punishments. They are information. They tell another person where you end and where their responsibility begins. A healthy boundary does not demand that another person become perfect. It does not try to control their emotions, force them to agree, or make them understand everything immediately. It simply makes your participation clear. You cannot control what another person chooses to do, but you can decide what you are willing to remain present for. Disappointing others without abandoning yourself. One of the hardest lessons in emotional maturity is this: someone can be disappointed in you, and you can still be a good person. Their disappointment may be real. Their hurt may deserve compassion. Their needs may matter. But their discomfort does not automatically mean that you have done something wrong. This is difficult for people who have spent their lives measuring goodness by how little inconvenience they create. They may confuse another person's sadness with proof of their own cruelty. They may believe that every request must be fulfilled, every expectation must be met, and every conflict must be repaired immediately. But this is impossible. You will disappoint people sometimes. You will not always be available. You will make choices they do not understand. You will outgrow roles they preferred you to play. You will say no to things that once received a yes. And some people may respond with anger, guilt, withdrawal, or accusation. Their reaction may feel painful, but it is still not proof that your boundary was wrong. The deeper question is not, are they unhappy with me? It is, have I acted with honesty, respect, and self-respect? There is a difference between causing unnecessary harm and refusing to prevent all discomfort. You can say no without cruelty. You can leave without hatred. You can set a limit without needing to justify every detail of your inner life. You can care about someone's feelings without making those feelings your permanent responsibility. This does not mean becoming indifferent. Compassion matters. Communication matters. It is good to consider how your choices affect people, but compassion without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. And self-abandonment does not create lasting peace. It only creates relationships in which your needs become invisible, even to you. To disappoint someone without abandoning yourself is to remain steady in the discomfort. It is to allow another person their response without immediately rushing to erase it. It is to remember that love does not require constant agreement, and respect does not require constant access. The quiet strength of a clear limit, a clear boundary, does not need to be dramatic. It does not need anger to make it valid. It does not require a long defense, a perfect explanation, or permission from the person receiving it. Often, the strongest limit is quiet. I cannot do that. I need some space. I am not available for this conversation right now. That does not work for me. I understand you are disappointed, but my decision remains the same. These sentences can feel difficult because they leave little room for the old habit of over-explaining. The people-pleasing mind often wants to provide enough reasons that no one could possibly be upset. But there will always be someone who is upset. The purpose of a boundary is not to make everyone comfortable. It is to make your reality clear. Over-explaining can become another attempt to control another person's reaction. You explain and explain because you hope that, if they understand every detail, they will not judge you. But their interpretation is not fully yours to manage. Clarity is often kinder than resentment. A direct no is kinder than a reluctant yes that becomes bitterness. A calm limit is kinder than disappearing without explanation. A truthful statement is kinder than pretending you have more to give than you do. The quiet strength of a clear limit comes from its simplicity. It does not need to attack. It does not need to accuse. It does not need to prove that the other person is wrong. It simply honors what is true. At first, setting boundaries may feel unnatural. You may feel guilty. You may question yourself. You may want to take back what you said just to make the discomfort stop. But guilt is not always a sign that you have done something harmful. Sometimes guilt is simply the feeling that arises when you stop behaving according to an old pattern. With time, each boundary becomes evidence. Evidence that you can survive someone's disappointment. Evidence that you can remain kind without being endlessly available. Evidence that you can protect your peace without becoming cold. Boundaries create emotional space. They give you room to hear yourself again, to recognize your needs, and to stop making every relationship a test of how much of yourself you are willing to sacrifice. But detachment becomes complete only when a person learns to care without making another person responsible for their inner stability. Chapter 8. Caring without clinging to care for someone deeply is one of the most human things we can do. We want to be close. We want to understand. We want to help when someone is hurting. We want to protect what matters to us from pain, distance, and loss. But care can become confused with control. Love can become confused with possession. Concern can become confused with the need to rescue. And in that confusion, a person may slowly lose themselves while trying to keep someone else close. Mature love does not ask another person to become the source of your stability. It does not demand constant proof, endless access, or the power to decide whether you can feel whole. It allows two people to remain separate, imperfect, and free while still choosing to meet each other with honesty and care. This is the difference between caring and clinging. One creates connection. The other creates captivity. Love and attachment are not the same. Love says, I care about who you are. Attachment says, I need you to make me feel secure. Love wants another person to grow, even when their growth does not unfold according to your wishes. Attachment wants guarantees. It wants to know that the person will stay, respond, choose you, need you, and remain emotionally available in the exact ways that quiet your fear. Love sees another person as a full human being, someone with their own history, limits, moods, needs, desires, and freedom. Attachment can begin to see them as an answer to loneliness, an answer to insecurity, an answer to the fear of being forgotten, an answer to the question of whether you are enough. This is where closeness becomes heavy. The attached person may not say, you are responsible for my peace, but their behavior may reveal it. They may become anxious when the other person needs space. They may read distance into ordinary independence. They may need constant reassurance that the bond has not changed. They may feel threatened when the other person has a full life beyond the relationship. But no relationship can remain healthy when one person is asked to carry the emotional weight of another person's self-worth. Love needs room. Room for separate thoughts. Room for different needs. Room for moments of distance that do not become evidence of rejection. Room for two people to remain whole rather than becoming emotionally fused. This does not mean love is detached in the sense of being distant or uncaring. It means love is secure enough to allow freedom. You can miss someone without demanding that they erase every space between you. You can care about their pain without believing you must fix it. You can want closeness without making closeness the only place you feel safe. Love becomes more honest when it stops asking another person to heal wounds they did not create. The need to rescue helping others can be beautiful. To show up for someone in difficulty, to listen, to offer support, to give time and care when it is freely chosen. These are meaningful expressions of love, but helping can also become a hidden emotional need. Some people feel most valuable when they are needed. They become drawn to wounded, distant, unstable, or unavailable people. Because those relationships offer a role: the rescuer, the healer, the one who understands, the one who never gives up. At first this can feel like devotion. The person says, I see the good in them. They say, they just need someone who will stay. They say, I cannot leave them when they are struggling. But beneath these words may be a deeper fear: who am I if I am not necessary? The need to rescue often gives a person purpose. It makes them feel important. It creates the hope that if they can help someone heal, they will finally become impossible to lose. But this kind of connection can become exhausting. You begin carrying emotions that are not yours to carry. You excuse behavior that continues to hurt you. You confuse suffering together with intimacy. You give more and more, hoping that your effort will eventually transform the relationship. But love cannot do another person's inner work for them. You can support someone, but you cannot make them ready. You can understand their pain, but you cannot heal it on their behalf. You can offer compassion, but you cannot build a relationship alone. The rescuer often believes that leaving means betrayal. But sometimes staying in a role that destroys your peace is not loyalty. It is self-abandonment. Real care does not require you to become someone's therapist, savior, or emotional foundation. It allows you to help without losing the right to protect yourself. Giving without self-abandonment. Giving becomes unhealthy when you repeatedly offer what you do not truly have. Your time when you are depleted. Your forgiveness when the harm has not changed. Your attention when you need space. Your agreement when you feel unseen. Your silence when something important needs to be said. Self-abandonment often happens gradually. A person does not decide to disappear all at once. They make small compromises in the name of peace. They ignore discomfort. They lower a boundary. They accept less than they need. They tell themselves it is not important. But eventually, they no longer recognize themselves inside the relationship. They may still be loved. They may still be needed. They may even be appreciated. But they do not feel free. Giving without self-abandonment means allowing your care to have limits. It means remembering that your needs are not an obstacle to love. They are part of the truth of who you are. You can say, "I care about you," but I cannot carry this for you. You can say, "I want to support you," but I need support too. You can say, "I understand your pain, but it does not justify how I am being treated." You can say, "I love you," but I cannot keep betraying myself to keep this connection alive. These statements may feel difficult because they challenge the belief that love must always be selfless. But love without self-respect eventually becomes resentment. It creates a relationship in which one person is always giving and another is always receiving. It may look stable from the outside, but internally it becomes unbalanced, exhausting, and fragile. The ability to give without self-abandonment creates a different kind of connection. One built not on fear, obligation, or emotional debt, but on honesty. And honesty is one of the deepest forms of care. Love that leaves you whole. The healthiest relationships do not ask you to become smaller in order to remain close. They do not require you to hide your needs, silence your truth, or sacrifice your peace to keep the connection stable. They allow affection and autonomy to exist together. In a whole relationship, you can love someone and still have a life beyond them. You can be committed without being controlled. You can be vulnerable without being consumed. You can speak honestly without fearing that every disagreement will become abandonment. You can have boundaries without being punished for having them. This kind of love is not always dramatic. It may not create the emotional intensity of uncertainty, pursuit, and constant proof. It can feel quieter at first because it does not depend on chaos to make the bond feel alive. But quiet does not mean shallow. Often, quiet is what safety feels like. Love that leaves you whole does not promise that no one will ever disappoint you. Every human relationship includes misunderstanding, limitation, and moments of distance. But it does not require you to lose yourself whenever difficulty appears. It invites you to remain present, to communicate, to repair where repair is possible, to leave where respect no longer exists, to care without turning care into a reason to tolerate what diminishes you. The goal is not to stop needing people. The goal is to stop needing another person's presence in order to remain connected to your own worth. When love is no longer a test of survival, it becomes freer. You can choose someone without clinging to them. You can support them without rescuing them. You can miss them without losing yourself. You can let them be human without demanding that they become the answer to every fear you carry. This is mature love connection without possession, generosity without self-erasure, and closeness without emotional captivity. And the deepest form of detachment emerges when we stop demanding control over people, timing, and the future itself. Chapter 9. Releasing the need for control. There is a kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to manage a life that cannot be fully managed. It is the exhaustion of checking for signs before they become problems, of predicting what people might do, of preparing for pain before pain has arrived, of controlling your words, your image, your plans, your emotions, and sometimes even the emotional reactions of everyone around you. The mind tells itself that control creates safety. If you think far enough ahead, perhaps nothing will surprise you. If you prepare carefully enough, perhaps nothing will go wrong. If you become useful enough, calm enough, impressive enough, or easy enough to love, perhaps no one will leave. But life does not become controllable simply because we become more vigilant. And the more tightly we try to control it, the more fragile we often feel when it changes. Detachment begins when we stop confusing control with peace. The exhaustion of trying to control life, the need for control, can appear in many forms. Sometimes it appears as planning every possible outcome before making a decision. Sometimes it appears as constantly checking messages, replaying conversations, or searching for hidden meaning in another person's behavior. Sometimes it appears as perfectionism. You tell yourself that if you do everything correctly, no one can criticize you. If you make no mistakes, you will avoid shame. If you prepare for every possibility, you will never be caught off guard. But this creates a life of constant alertness. You become the manager of every possible disaster. You monitor tone. You study silence. You predict rejection. You imagine failure before you begin. You try to manage how others see you, how they respond to you, and what they may feel about you when you are not there. This is exhausting because control has no natural endpoint. There is always another possibility to consider, another message to reread, another risk to prevent, another version of the future to rehearse. The mind says, if I just think a little more, I can finally rest. But rest never arrives because life continues to produce the one thing control cannot fully remove: uncertainty. The truth is that much of the need for control is not about wanting power. It is about wanting protection. The person who controls every detail is often not arrogant. They may be afraid. Afraid of being disappointed. Afraid of being misunderstood. Afraid of making the wrong choice. Afraid of discovering that their effort cannot guarantee the outcome they wanted. Control becomes a way of saying, if I can manage enough, perhaps I will not have to feel helpless. But helplessness is part of being human. There are moments when you will not know what happens next. People will make choices you cannot direct. Plans will change without your permission. You will lose things you worked hard to keep. You will sometimes feel unprepared for what life asks of you. The attempt to prevent every painful outcome does not remove pain. It only asks you to suffer before pain has even arrived. What you can control and what you cannot piece begins with a difficult distinction. There are things that belong to you, and there are things that do not. You can control your actions. You can control the honesty of your words. You can control the boundaries you set. You can control where you place your attention. You can control whether you act according to fear or according to your values. You can control whether you stay in a situation that repeatedly harms you. You can control how willing you are to learn, repair, rest, begin again, and remain true to yourself. But you cannot control another person's feelings. You cannot control whether they understand you fully. You cannot control whether they stay. You cannot control how quickly life gives you an answer. You cannot control timing, chance, loss, or every consequence of a decision. This distinction can feel painful at first because it removes a familiar illusion. It asks you to stop believing that enough effort can make another person choose you. It asks you to stop believing that more worry can guarantee a better future. It asks you to stop making yourself responsible for outcomes that involve forces far beyond your control. But this distinction is not a loss of power. It is a return of power. When you focus on what you cannot control, your energy becomes scattered. You become dependent on other people's moods, timing, choices, and reactions. Your peace rises and falls with external conditions. But when you return attention to what is yours, something becomes steadier. You may not control whether someone responds with honesty, but you can choose not to betray your own truth. You may not control whether a goal arrives on your preferred timeline, but you can decide whether your effort remains aligned with your values. You may not control whether life gives you the outcome you hoped for, but you can decide whether disappointment will make you abandon yourself. This is not about becoming indifferent to what happens. It is about refusing to give away your entire inner life to what you cannot command. Acceptance is not surrendering your life. Many people resist acceptance because they confuse it with giving up. They think that accepting reality means approving of it. That accepting loss means saying it did not matter. That accepting another person's limits means allowing them to mistreat you. That accepting uncertainty means becoming passive. But acceptance is not resignation. Acceptance is seeing clearly. It is saying, this is what is happening right now. Not what you hoped would happen. Not what someone promised might happen. Not what you could still force yourself to imagine, but what is actually here. Acceptance may sound simple, but it can be deeply difficult. It means acknowledging that someone is not able to love you in the way you need. It means admitting that a plan has changed. It means recognizing that you cannot keep waiting for a version of someone that exists only in your hope. It means facing the fact that effort does not always produce the result you wanted. But only when reality is accepted can wise action begin. You cannot leave a situation clearly if you are still pretending it is something else. You cannot set a boundary honestly if you keep denying what hurts. You cannot create a new future while insisting that the old one must still return. Acceptance does not say, this is fair. It does not say, this is what I wanted. It says, this is real. And because it is real, I can now decide how I will meet it. That is strength. Resignation says, nothing I do matters. Acceptance says, I cannot control everything, but I can control my response. Resignation gives up on the self. Acceptance returns you to the self. It helps you stop wasting energy fighting what has already happened, and begin using that energy to protect, rebuild, choose, and move forward. Peace beyond the need to know. The need for control is often a need to know. To know whether they will stay. To know whether the decision will work. To know whether the future will reward you. To know whether you are safe from disappointment before you allow yourself to feel at peace. But peace cannot depend on complete knowledge. Life will always contain unanswered questions. You will not always know why someone changed. You will not always know whether you made the best choice until time has passed. You will not always know what loss is making room for. You will not always know how strong you are until you are asked to carry something difficult. The person who waits for certainty before resting may wait forever, but the person who learns to trust themselves becomes capable of a different kind of peace. Not peace because every outcome is guaranteed. Peace because they know they can meet an outcome without losing themselves. Self-trust says, I may not know what happens next, but I know I can remain honest. It says I may feel pain, but I do not need to chase what harms me in order to escape it. It says I may be disappointed, but disappointment will not erase my worth. It says I may not control the future, but I can participate in it with courage. This is the freedom that comes when control begins to loosen. You no longer need every person to understand you before you trust your own experience. You no longer need every plan to succeed before you believe your life has meaning. You no longer need every uncertainty resolved before you allow yourself to breathe. You begin to understand that peace is not something waiting at the end of a perfectly controlled life. It is something practiced in the middle of an uncertain one. And once control loosens, detachment reveals its true purpose. It is not distance from life. It is freedom within it. Chapter 10. The Freedom of Detachment. There is a moment in the work of letting go when something begins to change. Not outside of you at first. The person may still be gone. The outcome may still be uncertain. The future may still refuse to reveal itself. There may still be unanswered questions, old memories, difficult emotions, and moments when the mind wants to return to what it knows. But something inside becomes less captive. You stop needing every question answered before you can rest. You stop needing every person to understand you before you can trust your own experience. You stop asking the past to become different before you allow yourself to move forward. This is the freedom of detachment. It is not a cold freedom. It is not the freedom of no longer caring, no longer loving, no longer hoping, or no longer allowing life to matter. It is the freedom of caring without being consumed, of loving without losing yourself, of hoping without making hope a prison, of participating in life without demanding that life obey every fear you carry. What detachment truly means, detachment is often mistaken for distance. People hear the word and imagine someone closed off, emotionally unreachable, untouched by loss, indifferent to connection. They imagine a person who needs no one and expects nothing. But this is not detachment. This is often protection. True detachment is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of freedom within feeling. It means you can love someone without trying to possess them. You can care about an outcome without making it responsible for your worth. You can remember the past without needing to live inside it. You can feel grief without turning grief into your identity. You can make an effort without believing that the result must justify your existence. Detachment is presence without possession. It is love without self-loss. It is effort without emotional captivity. The detached person does not stop caring when things become uncertain. They simply stop sacrificing their entire inner life to what they cannot control. They understand that people are not objects to be held in place. They have their own freedom, needs, fears, limitations, and paths. You may invite someone into your life, but you cannot force them to remain. You may love them sincerely, but you cannot make them ready. You may offer honesty, patience, and care, but you cannot do another person's inner work for them. And you do not need to. The moment you stop trying to control what is not yours to control, you become more available to what is yours. Your choices, your values, your attention, your boundaries, your capacity to begin again. Detachment does not remove pain from life. It removes the unnecessary suffering created by trying to hold tightly to what must be free. Returning to yourself, attachment pulls attention outward. It pulls you toward another person's mood, another person's silence, another person's choices. It pulls you toward the future you are trying to secure, the memory you are trying to understand, the result you are trying to force into existence. Slowly, you may begin to lose contact with yourself. You stop asking what you need. You stop noticing what hurts. You stop honoring the values that once guided you. Your time, energy, and emotional life become organized around something outside you. Returning to yourself is the beginning of freedom. It means reclaiming the attention you have given to what cannot be controlled. It means asking not, why are they acting this way? But, what is this situation asking me to see about myself? Not, how can I make them choose me? But, why have I made their choice the measure of my value? Not, how can I guarantee this outcome? But, what is the next action that allows me to remain aligned with who I want to be? Returning to yourself is not selfishness. It is responsibility. You cannot build a peaceful life while abandoning the person who must live at you. This return may be quiet. It may mean taking a walk rather than sending another message. It may mean resting instead of checking for reassurance. It may mean speaking one honest sentence after years of silence. It may mean ending a pattern that once felt familiar. It may mean allowing another person to be disappointed without immediately trying to repair their feelings at the cost of your own. Each time you return to yourself, you reclaim a small piece of emotional energy, and over time these small returns become a new inner foundation. You begin to understand that peace does not come from keeping everything you love. It comes from refusing to lose yourself whenever something changes. The practice of letting go, is rarely a single event. You do not release something once and never think of it again. You do not make one clear decision and suddenly become untouched by old longing, memory, fear, or hope. Some days, you will feel free. Other days, the old attachment may return. A song may bring back a memory. A quiet evening may awaken the urge to check. A difficult moment may make an old relationship seem more beautiful than it truly was. An uncertain future may make you want to return to an identity that once made you feel safe. This does not mean you have failed. It means you are practicing. The practice of letting go is the practice of noticing when the mind reaches backward, outward, or ahead in search of control, and gently returning to what is real. You release the expectation that someone must understand you perfectly. You release the memory that has become a private courtroom. You release the old identity that no longer fits the person you are becoming. You release the outcome you have tried to use as proof that your life is meaningful. And then, when those attachments return, you release them again. Not with anger. Not with shame. Not by forcing yourself to feel nothing. But with honesty. You say, this mattered to me. I still feel its weight. But I do not need to carry it in the same way anymore. You say, I can miss what was without making it my future. You say, I can want something without making my peace dependent on receiving it. This is the compassion at the center of detachment. You do not punish yourself for caring. You simply learn to care in a way that leaves room for your own life. A life you do not need to escape. The deepest purpose of detachment is not to become untouched by life. It is to build a life you do not constantly need to escape. A life in which silence does not feel like abandonment. A life in which uncertainty does not automatically become panic. A life in which someone else's distance does not erase your worth. A life in which disappointment can hurt without destroying your sense of self. This kind of life is not built through control. It is built through inner stability. You become a stable place for yourself when you learn to trust your own presence. When you stop abandoning your needs to keep people close. When you stop delaying peace until the future gives you permission. When you stop measuring your value through outcomes, attention, achievement, or approval. Then, relationships begin to change. You no longer chase people who offer confusion instead of care. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. You no longer stay because leaving feels like becoming nothing. You can love people for who they are, not for what they promise to repair inside you. You can release what no longer belongs in your life without turning release into bitterness. You can allow life to change without believing that every change is a loss of self. This is the freedom of detachment. Not a life without love. Not a life without desire. Not a life without grief. But a life in which love, desire, and grief no longer have the power to make you abandon yourself. You will still care. You will still hope. You will still feel the pull of what once mattered, but you will become more capable of meeting those feelings with awareness rather than surrendering your entire life to them. The people who stay will be loved more freely. The people who leave will no longer take your entire identity with them. The outcomes you pursue will matter, but they will not become the only reason you allow yourself to feel whole. And when life changes, as life always does, you will have somewhere to return. Not to the past. Not to another person's approval. Not to the certainty you were never promised. But to yourself,